First, I'd like to express my thanks for the invitation to speak here tonight, and especially to Matush for coordinating this event. I'd also like to thank the Department of Germanic Studies at Charles University for so warmly welcoming me to Prague. I've only just recently arrived in the city, but I'm already trying to take advantage of all of the resources it has to offer, not the least of which includes your very impeccable and affordable beer. Tonight I will speak about some aspects of my research on medieval Icelandic mythology and new object philosophy. This paper presents some preliminary thoughts regarding several topics, including narratological strategies for an object-oriented study of myth, the intersections between literary materialism and medieval understandings of the environment, and ultimately, what lessons those of us in 2025 can glean from the medieval past as relates to our own ecological emergency. I've presented some aspects of this research on ecocide and mythology elsewhere, most recently as part of a combined project with researchers at New York University for the Modern Language Association in New Orleans. But in tonight's paper, I will aim to examine certain aspects of the Old Norse cataclysmic event called ragnarök, and place this mythological event in conversation with scholastic discussions of the Anthropocene. I realize as well that Old Icelandic literature is not the usual topic of discussion for the Czech Academy of Sciences, so I will do my best to speak more conceptually about mythology and ecocritical study and limit an intense scrutinization of the finer nuances of the Old Norse mythological corpus. To do otherwise, I'm afraid, would also devour most of our time. So I will ask your forgiveness here at the beginning if I paint the Old Norse mythological texts in broad strokes for the sake of argument. The concepts of the Anthropocene, which I will be discussing at length, should, I think, be rather universal and timely. Let me then commence with the definition and explanation of how this word, Anthropocene, is used both by myself and by literary scholars. At the dawn of the new millennium, Paul Crutzen, a Nobel laureate in chemistry, and his colleagues proposed the term Anthropocene to describe a new geological era for the planet. For Crutzen, this geological period is one fundamentally defined by the impacts of human activity upon the Earth. As he explains, quote, considering these and many other major and still growing impacts of human activities on Earth and atmosphere, and at all including global scales, it seems to us more than appropriate to emphasize the central role of mankind in geology and ecology by proposing to use the term Anthropocene for the current geological epoch. The impacts of current human activities will continue over long periods, end quote. For Crutzen and others, coining this term is not merely an attempt to accurately describe a new geological epoch, but rather an inherently political act. Writing in January 2011 for Yale Environment 360, Crutzen and Christian Schweiger state, quote, rather than representing yet another sign of human hubris, this name change to Anthropocene would stress the enormity of humans' responsibility as stewards of the earth. It would highlight the immense power of our intellect and our creativity and the opportunities they offer for shaping the future, end quote. This emphasis on humanity's responsibility stands in contrast to some more fatalistic receptions of the term, which posit that it is already too late to stop humanity's detrimental impact. There are several assumptions which underlie this fatalism. As Claire Colebrook has summarized, quote, first, we have passed a tipping point. Second, this geological event is a game changer and spells death both for social constructivism and post-humanism. And finally, we are faced with the stark choice. Either we radically transform the world or we are doomed. The Anthropocene is not only a geological declaration, but a series of diagnoses that generate imperatives. The coining of the term Anthropocene then would seem at once blinding and enlightening. On one hand, the term forces us to confront our own impact on global ecological systems. It forces us to recognize the power humans wield over the non-human natural world and implies a sense of responsibility for this impact. Yet on the other hand, the fatalism of this geological term implies that irreversible damage to the planet is already done. In this sense, the Anthropocene has already come and gone by the time we've recognized it. In other words, the term alerts us to our own destruction only after it is too late to stop. Some critics have voiced issue with the term itself, positing that such ecocide is really the result of a capital scene, driven by industry and avarice, averring this sin is not done in the name of all humanity, but only of the corporate bourgeois. Yet even amid this criticism, there remains a passive acceptance to the reality of ecological disaster. This is the way in which Cohen, Colebrook, and Miller play with the concept of Twilight in their appropriately titled ecological study, Twilight of the Anthropocene Idols. The Anthropocene for them is a force at once capable of illuminating and blinding, diminishing almost as soon as it is recognized, but capable nonetheless of final revelatory power. For Colebrook, the utility of the Anthropocene as a term lies less in its statements about human impact, whether as a whole species or as a capital scene, but rather in the ways in which the concept of self-annihilation inscribes what it means to be human in a physical and natural world. As Colebrook notes, quote, "If there is a way that we might survive, then that path we must follow. And who is this we that is being saved? It is the we that is constituted precisely by way of a death sentence. I mourn my future non-being, and therefore I am," end quote. To Colebrook, this ecocide, this eschatology, this end-of-days narrative of climate disaster is what forces us collectively to examine what being human is. The eschatology of the Anthropocene is a narrative rooted in science and based on ecological data, but a narrative nonetheless. We are forced by invoking the Greek anthropos, meaning human or man, to encounter ourselves through the very potentiality of our annihilation. Who is to be destroyed? Who is to be saved? And if we must do the saving, what does it mean to be part of this collective? Most important of all, who or what are we fighting against? These questions are grappled with by searching for how humanity understands itself through narrative and through inscription. Quote, "Can we legitimately know or feel what it is like to be other than human? There is no shortage of talk and lament regarding the human, and both its incapacity and capacity to think outside its all-too-human subjectivity. But all that talk about the post-human, the non-human, the inhuman, and the problem of lumping all humans into the Anthropocene provides a way of sustaining the human as a problem. Moreover, quote, what if the human were an effect of its own delusions of self-erasure? What if there were no humanity other than that which is affected from the thought of the other than human? We can think of this in many ways. One way would be to see the constant proclamations of overwhelming humanism, Cartesianism, and anthropocentrism as producing man, as the being who can annihilate himself in order to become animal, end quote. It is curious, then, that within their discussion of the Anthropocene and the role of human inscription, Cohen, Colebrook, and Miller do not make considerations for mythographic inscription. If indeed the purpose of the Anthropocene inscription is to posit new worlds and realities, then it is the mythological, more so than other forms of narrative inscription, which does not hesitate to speculate about the power of non-human entities to shape and form our notions of humanity. It is in myth more so than film and literary fiction that we find the most readily accessible narratives of human annihilation as part of social ideology. Mythography, as the scholar Bruce Holsinger has noted, accepts, quote, alternative realities and contingent truths, like certain strains of modern analytic philosophy and science fiction. It posits possible worlds and builds them out from within by acts of intellection, extended metaphoric conceits, and provisional bids for our faith, end quote. Holsinger's approach is rooted in the literary new materialism in which Colebrook and her colleagues are engaged, stemming from the material turn brought on by literary scholars like Bill Brown, Jane Bennett, and Graham Harman. This new object philosophy asks us to consider the agency and force of the physical world upon humanity. This reassessment of traditional subject-object dynamics, in which human observers sublimate those things with which they come into contact, has yielded productive results for interrogating culturally inscribed notions of the human. As Holsinger notes, quote, mythography asks how to conceive of the boundedness of objects, how to imagine the composition of the human as object beyond the limits of flesh, bone, and spirit. What exactly philosophy ponders when it ponders life, and of special interest here, what I would call the quickening power of myth within the universe of flat ontology, end quote. Attempts to reassess the cultural inscription of the Old Norse Genesis and eschatology through object-oriented narratological strategies is therefore a logical way to access key aspects of Norse myth, to trace the significance of non-human entities throughout that corpus, and offer new interpretations for how such narratives inscribe interconnectivity between the human and the non-human. I contend that such an approach allows us to further answer questions of how medieval Scandinavians understood their place within a physical universe, how an understanding of human evanescence solidifies such notions, and why the inevitable ending of one world necessitates the creation of new and better worlds. To that end, let us return to Cohen, Colebrook, and Miller's Twilight of the Anthropocene Idols. I've spoken a bit already about the blinding and lightening effects of Twilight with which these authors treat the concept in their book, but I have not yet discussed what it leaves out through use of this metaphor. Cohen, Colebrook, and Miller's title is clearly derived from Nietzsche's philosophic critique titled The Twilight of the Idols, in a nod clearly to Wagner's Götterdämmerung, or The Twilight of the Gods, and the subsequent Norse myth of ragnarök, with which this part of Wagner's opera, Der Ring der Nibelungen, deals. It is curious, however, that since Colebrook's purpose in discussing the Anthropocene's twilight effect on inscription, that the myths from which the title of this book stems are left to the wayside. This is especially poignant when the implications of the language used to describe the apocalypse of Norse myth is so variable. This variability, I argue, creates several useful lenses through which we can examine the intersections of eschatology and inscription that Colebrook posits. We should begin then with the word ragnarök itself. This is the term commonly associated with the end of the Norse cosmos, a final fight of gods and men against their ancient adversaries, the giants, as well as catastrophic phenomena such as floods, volcanic eruptions, and perpetual winter. However, the word ragnarök has variable iterations throughout the Old Norse corpus. Two spellings of the word appear throughout the main sources for Norse mythological information. That is, in the 13th century prose work compiled by the Icelander Snorri Sturluson, titled Snorra Edda, and in a 13th century anonymous codex, GKS 2365 Quarto, from Iceland called the Poetic Edda. Snorri, in discussing the cataclysm of gods and men, uses the term ragnarökur, which means the twilight or the darkening of the divine powers. This stands in contrast to the mythological information provided in the Old Norse poem Völuspá from the Poetic Edda, which uses the term ragnarök. Rather than yielding an image of twilight and fading, this term ragnarök means something akin to the doom, the fate, or the judgment of the powers or gods, wherein the Old Norse word rök emphasizes the concept of judgment or inevitability. Still, some ambiguities in these words exist. As Anders Hultgard explains, quote, correspondingly the meaning a decisive mythic event concerning the gods is the one underlying the concept ragnarök, which includes not only the destruction of the world, but also its renewal. The word ragnarökur the word rökur in ragnarökur means twilight and refers to Old Norse, it refers in Old Norse both to sunset and sunrise. And indeed, it may be etymologically related to rök, It has been argued that both terms have the basic meaning renewal of the divine powers, end quote. There are subsequently three ways in which to play conceptually with the Norse apocalypse. One, as a fading and renewal, stemming from ragnarök. Two, as a faded, unavoidable cataclysm, ragnarök. And three, as a judgment of the powers which have brought on this ending and beginning, ragnarök. While seemingly disparate, these concepts and terms overlap in key ways. For instance, ragnarök, with its sense of fading and renewal, does not present an apocalypse which is final. It is not a twilight descending into a long night of human oblivion, but rather a faded cyclical pattern in which the anthropos is continuously inscribed, erased, and reinscribed. Because rökkr implies both sunset and sunrise, there is a certain natural determinism that arises from the term ragnarökkr. Just as the sun will set in the evening, so too shall it rise in the morning. It is therefore a fatalistic process, unavoidable decline and renewal no different than the changing of the seasons, and therefore intersects with the second conceptual category. This fatalistic decline and renewal, however, does not occur without commentary. The process of erasure and reinscription is precipitated by societal failures, brothers slaying brothers, human strife, and the breakdown of traditional kinship taboos. As society collapses, so too does the environment. As the giants themselves embodiments of disorder destroy the foundations of the earth and the environment, humans and gods too collapse. By the end of the conflict, the world has been destroyed, but will rise once more and a new cycle will start where the previous social and environmental failures have been meaningfully reconciled. This is part and parcel of the type of judgment that occurs regarding the end of one cycle and the beginning of another. Gods and men do not walk away without some change. I will return to more concrete examples of this cyclicality later in my argument, but a general overview of the cataclysm is necessary to outline here before diving into the smaller details. What then are the accessible points by which we can interrogate these three apocalyptic conceptualizations? As the title of my talk suggests, I believe a productive methodology is through object-oriented narratology. I argue so because rather than simply marginalizing humans to promote study of physical material, object-oriented narratology attempts to capture how objects shape human experience, a methodological approach in line with Colebrook's study of the Anthropocene. In making this case, I draw from the work of Marie-Laure Ryan and Tang Wei Sheng, who argue that, quote, if narrative is built on a mode of cognition that enables us to deal with the world and with other people by setting goals and by acting towards their achievement, then objects are an integral part of this cognition, end quote. For Ryan and Wei Sheng, humans inscribe the non-human, which reflexively inscribes what it means to be human back. This narratological feedback can be assessed via the four main functions of narrative objects. The first, the mimetic, how objects are represented, allowing readers to form mental images. The second, the thematic, the symbolic dimension and object's contribution to the global meaning of a text. Third, the strategic, the role of objects in the plot or how they determine character lives. And four, the structural, how objects are used as connectors between narrative episodes. Objects can fulfill multiple functions within a narrative, but each of these four functions remain distinct in how they affect the reader, plot, and characterization. Consequently, multiple of the mythological non-human entities discussed within this paper overlap in function, but I will attempt to present examples of how each function accomplishes something slightly different. For mythological genesis and eschatology, this analysis must be accomplished on both the microscopic and macroscopic levels, because the non-human objects present at the beginning and end of the Norse universe constitute the entirety of the cosmos, as well as all the things that exist within it. To interrogate non-human objects is to interrogate the cosmos itself, according to the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. In his famous example of the jug, the unknowable ontology of objects, in this case a jug, mediates the cosmos, creating a harmonious world out of disparate elements. Quote, "Earth and sky dwell in the gift of the outpouring of the jug. In the gift of the outpouring, earth and sky, divinities and mortals dwell together all at once," end quote. Although Heidegger is more concerned with the ontological rather than the phenomenological of the non-human, his understanding of the role of such entities as ontologically multiple, a nexus at which the mundane meets the cosmic, is a useful heuristic through which to understand mythological materiality. The ontological multiplicity of the universe is nowhere clearer in the Norse myths than the narrative of its origin. For Old Norse mythology, there are three main sources of information for this genesis. Two mythological poems called Völuspá and Grimnismál, and the prose mythography of Snorri Sturluson. Snorri's account provides the most detail of this cosmological event, in which at the beginning of time, there is nothing but a vast void called Ginnungagap. From this void emerges a primordial giant named Ymir. Shortly thereafter, another being emerges, the progenitor of the gods named Buri. It is Buri's grandsons, by way of his son Bor, who eventually decide to slay the primordial giant Ymir and fashion the world from his body. As Snorri explains, quote, "The sons of Bor killed the giant Ymir, and made from him the earth, out of his blood the sea and the lakes. The earth was made from his flesh, and the rocks of the bones. They made the stones and rubble of the teeth and the molars, and from those bones which were broken." This violent cosmogonic event presupposes a continuum between natural objects and the anthropomorphic body parts of the celestial giant. Homology exists, as scholars like Bruce Lincoln have noted, wherein the anthropomorphic and the environmental mirror each other. The skull of the giant, being the highest point on the body, becomes the sky, the highest point in the environment. Blood corresponding to its liquid, environmental counterpart become the oceans. Bones, being rigid and firm, become stone, and so on. The universe of the Norse myths is therefore quite literally an embodied universe. Transcorporeal in the sense that, as Stacy Alaimo has defined it, corporeality in all its material fleshiness is inseparable from nature or the environment. Consequently, object-oriented narratological examinations of these non-human environmental objects become inextricable from the Anthropocene. To approach environmental objects such as earth, oceans, rocks, and stone is to simultaneously deal with anthropomorphic body parts. Mimetically, the image of these entities becomes, to the reader or listener, one rooted in their own biology. To look up at the dome of heaven is to see the skull of the giant. To bathe in the oceans and rivers is to see liquid blood. The description of the world in Snorri's Edda slows the pace of the narrative, taking time to paint a mental image for the reader of how and what these body parts were transformed into. This image carries directly into the second function of object-oriented narratology, the thematic. In linking the symbolic dimension of these objects to the larger global meaning of the text, the environment and the human become ontologically multiple. The environmental is the human is the environmental. Each exists as part and parcel of the other. The anthropomorphic stems out of the yawning chaos of nothingness, just as the physical universe does. But what does this mean for the third and fourth narrative functions, that is, the strategic and the structural? There is little insight to be gleaned from merely saying that natural features are strategic or structural, insofar as narrative episodes are linked solely because they occur within embodied universes. This would be true of any narrative. Rather, I believe it is the activities surrounding these natural objects, whether acted upon or acting themselves, which create strategic and structural function. Völuspá stanzas 5 and 6 contain key material descriptions. In stanza 5 of the poem, we are told that celestial bodies like the sun, the stars, and the moon do not know their place or understand their power. The emphasis of the Old Norse verbs vita, to know or to have a sense of, and eiga, to own or to possess, emphasize the relative agency of such celestial bodies. Quote, "The sun from the south, the moon's companion, threw her right hand around the edge of the rim of heaven. The sun did not know where she had her hall. The stars did not know where they had their place. The moon did not know what power he possessed." In the poem's formulation, these objects explicitly have the capability of thinking and possessing. Yet they lack a sense of order from which to exert this agency. It is not until the gods themselves create this order of a unified and coherent cosmos that all of these actors fall into place. To accomplish this, we are told that the gods go to their rockstolar, or seats of judgment, in order to deliberate this order. Quote, "Then all the powers go to the seats of doom, the sacrosanct gods, and they considered this. To night and her children they gave names, morning they named at midday, afternoon and evening to tally up the years," end quote. The word rockstolar, a combination of the same suffix rock as in ragnarök, and the word stolar, meaning stool, chair, or throne. The word emphasizes the same concept of judgment and fate as in ragnarök, embodying these concepts into a physical object. In this sense, the social world of the gods also becomes entangled with the natural world of celestial bodies. But this is far from the only instance in which the rockstolar make an appearance. The creation of other beings seems directly tied to the concept of fate and its embodiment in the gods' thrones. Völuspá stanza 9 records that the creation of the dwarves is the result of this same type of meeting. Quote, "Then all the powers went to the seats of doom, the sacrosanct gods, and considered this. Who should create the lord of the dwarves out of Brimir's blood and from Blauen's limbs?" End quote. The first half of the stanza mirrors that of stanza 6 directly, creating not only a structural link between the 2 points, between these 2 points in mythological time, but also a stylistic one. In both the ordering of the celestial bodies, the creation of the earth and the creation of non-human beings like dwarves, considerations for the non-human do not obliterate the human. Rather, they draw the human into natural cycles, obliterating boundaries between the artificial bifurcation between the human and the natural. Only the human ego is truly obliterated insofar as it becomes ontologically linked with natural cycles. As the gods create anthropomorphic non-human beings like dwarves and order the celestial bodies by imbuing them with fate or judgment, the human does not become distinct from these entities, but rather part of a patterned continuum of being. This structural pattern carries on into the very creation of mankind itself within the Old Norse Genesis narrative. Völuspá stanza 17 describes the creation of the first humans thus, quote, "Until 3 gods came out of that company, strong and loving, the Aesir to the world. They found on land little of power, Asker and Embla lacking in fate," end quote. Although later stanzas of Völuspá reveal that it is the Nornir, a trio of women similar to the Greek Moirai, who control the fates of men, it is the gods' discovery of these proto-humans and the subsequent engendering of the first man and woman which allows them to be caught up in the cycle of fate and judgment. The names of these proto-beings themselves, Asker and Embla, correspond to the Old Norse words for ash and elm trees, again drawing the human into the natural by making our material origins not divinely plucked out of the ether, but tied to the very body of the world itself. The Norse cosmos is held up by the primordial tree Yggdrasil, and thus the tree origins of humanity are ontologically linked with the non-human natural foundation of the cosmos. Rök and Orlog are essential in this instance because they thematically and structurally link the macrocosm of the universe's ordering with the microcosm of human existence. Just as with humans, the gods do not create the heavenly bodies. Their role is not to be anthropomorphic entities separate from nature who attempt to master and overpower it, but rather facilitators of natural cycles and order necessary for life. The Rockstolar are mentioned explicitly twice more in Völuspá, when the Aesir attempt to determine how another band of gods, the Vanir, should be incorporated into their society. Völuspá stanzas 23 and 25 relate the events thus. Quote, "Then all the powers went to the thrones of fate, the sacrosanct gods, and considered this, whether the Aesir should yield the tribute, or whether all the gods should share sacrificial feasts. And then all the powers went to the thrones of fate, the sacrosanct gods, and considered this, which people had troubled the air with treachery or given Other's girl to giant kind." End quote. The Vanir are explicitly connected to the natural world, with many of the gods and goddesses being attributed to fertility, for instance, Freya and Freyr, or to natural entities such as the god Njordr, who rules the sea. The Aesir, too, have their natural associations. Thor with thunder and lightning, Baldur with light, and Idun with fertility. But here once more, the Rockstolar indicate a type of ordering and synthesis between the natural and cultural worlds. To this end, they serve as the narratological functions of strategy and structure. Structurally, they are quite literally, or rather I should say, they quite literally determine character lives by imbuing the universe with a type of cosmic order and fate, which drives the progression of the mythological story forward towards its culmination in ragnarök. We move from the seats of fate and judgment to the very judgment of the powers that sit in them. This is the structural component of their presence as well, connecting narrative episodes in the beginning of time to the end of the world. The concept of fate and judgment underlies the cosmos, but judgment of what exactly? Here we must jump ahead to the onset of ragnarök. Snorri provides the most concise description of the event. Quote, "There are many important things to be told about ragnarök. First of all, that a winter will come called Fimbul winter, or mighty or mysterious winter. Then snow will drift from all directions. There will then be frosts and keen winds. The sun will do no good. There will be 3 of these winters together and no summer between. But before that, there will come 3 other winters during which there will be great battles throughout the world. Then brothers will kill each other out of greed, and no one will show mercy to father or son in killing or breaking the taboos of kinship." End quote. Later in this description, we are told, quote, "The wolf will swallow the sun, and the people will think this a great disaster. Then the other wolf will catch the moon, and he will also cause much mischief. The stars will disappear from the sky. Then there will take place another event. The whole earth and mountains will shake so that trees will become uprooted from the earth, and mountains will fall, and all fetters and bonds will snap and break. And when these events take place, Heimdallr will stand up and blow greatly on Gjallarhorn and awaken all the gods, and they will hold council together." End quote. Here at last we find the Norse cataclysm, in which the earth shall be swallowed up by the sea, the giants shall lay waste to the world with fire and violence, and the Aesir gods shall meet their doom. We find as well a cyclical presence, an antithesis of the order the gods first established. The sun and the moon, originally ordered and given fate, falter, swallowed up by the chaotic forces of giant wolves. The stars, too, who were given a place and a pattern, fall away into nothingness, disappearing from the very heavens the gods created. As Snorri tells us, quote, "All bonds will snap and break." Is this meant to be the bonds which hold back the forces of chaos? Or are these the very bonds of fate and order the gods originally established? Perhaps both work in tandem here. Nature itself frays at the seam as the world plunges headlong into oblivion. Thematically, strategically, and structurally, these cosmic objects not only symbolize the global meaning of the text in how they demonstrate the order of the embodied universe from Genesis to eschatology, but they seem to also, also determined by the role of the Rockstolar, the seats of fate from which order is established. The heavenly bodies and the earth itself, as well as the seats of fate, link the narrative episodes of creation to the final acts of destruction, as we see the gods take counsel, presumably at the Rockstolar, where they had at the beginning of time, to order and address the universe's return to chaos. But what has precipitated this cataclysm? Snorri is explicit. Quote, "Great battles will occur throughout the world. Brothers will kill each other out of greed, and no one will show mercy to father or son in killing or breaking the taboos of friendship," end quote. The moral failure of humanity has directly led to the killing and death of each other. As humans foster their own obliteration, they also obliterate the natural world. For the human to harm other humans, the order or the rök of the universe is disturbed via the violation of social taboos. The environment itself collapses just as society collapses. Ultimately, violence against the Anthropocene is violence against the environment because the two are ontologically multiple. The natural world and the human world have never existed separately in the Norse cosmological framework. In contrast to modern understandings of geological periods in which humans are relative newcomers to the universe, the Norse cosmos envisions the natural world and the anthropomorphic world as the same entity, not bifurcated, but extensions of the same phenomena. If we recall the giant Ymir and his dissection, the natural world that suffers during ragnarök is the same suffering of an anthropomorphic body. The suffering of the gods, the progenitors of humankind, and anthropomorphic in their own appearance, is also the suffering of humanity. Obliteration of one is the obliteration of the other, because they are ontologically linked through their materiality. In contrast to scholars like Chris Abram, who have read the ecocide of ragnarök as a product of exclusionary action against othered beings like giants, women, and animals, entities he sees as extensions of the natural environment, in contrast to the masculine, cultural, and oppressive society of the Aesir, I view the cyclicality of the Norse myths as fundamentally inscribing an ecosympathetic worldview. Humans and the environment are inextricable from each other. It is the giants who stand outside of that system by challenging the order and harmonious natural systems the gods create. But Ragnarök, in contrast to what its name implies, is not the end of the universe. Humans, gods, and the environment will survive, albeit in new forms. Völuspá paints a strong image of what this new world will look like. Quote, "She sees coming up a second time, earth from the ocean, eternally green. The waterfalls plunge, an eagle soars above them, over the mountain hunting fish. Without sowing, the fields will grow. All evil will be healed. Baldur will come. Hother and Baldur will settle down in Hrap's victory homesteads. The slaughter gods are well. Do you want to know more and what? A hall she sees standing, fairer than the sun, thatched with gold at Gimli. There the noble fighting bands will dwell and enjoy the days of their lives in pleasure." In this new, revived earth, the world is eternally green, and the social ills of the previous age have been rectified. Baldur, who was slain by his brother Hother by accident, comes back from the dead, and the two live in harmony with one another. Elsewhere in this vision, we are told that the god Hoenir, who was unable to make decisions and lead at the beginning of time, comes back, having rectified his failure of leadership. Because the social aspects of godly society have been rectified, nature has as well. Order, or rök, has been reaffirmed in the cosmos to an extreme degree, so that fields grow without having been sown, the sun shines fair, and the noble fighting retinues of mankind lay down their arms to live in peace. In this new world, humanity and the gods have learned lessons and healed all evils of their society. In so doing, they have simultaneously healed the world around them. To return then to Cohen and Colebrook's Twilight of the Anthropocene Idols, I believe an Old Norse reframing of Cohen and Colebrook's Twilight concept yields a multitude of understandings. The first, when we analyze the Anthropocene from the perspective of a judgment, the myths declare that a failure of humanity to properly order itself is the cause of ecocide and cataclysm. When viewed in light of what obliteration means for inscribing ourselves, the inscribed definition of humanity is a natural definition. The boundaries between culture and nature fall away because humans and non-humans are linked thematically, structurally, mimetically, and strategically across the narrative of time. The second, when ragnarök is conceived as a doom or fate, we understand this process to be inevitable. Just as seasons wax and wane and humans grow and die, so too does the society of men and gods, and therefore the world. This is fatalistically determined by the order of the cosmos themselves, but it is not without purpose. The new age rectifies the ills of the old age, and lessons are learned to push society and nature to a more harmonious future. Third, finally, when viewed as a twilight, we must remember that rökkur, as opposed to ragnarök, is conceptually linked both with the setting and the rising sun. Thus, ragnarök and ragnarökkur are not so distinct in their implications. I would like to conclude, then, with one final materially driven example from the myths I think embodies this argument very well. At the beginning of time, the poetic Edda via Völuspá tells us that the gods played peacefully with golden playing pieces shortly after the creation of the world. This peace is subsequently disturbed by the arrival of giants and the disruption of the established order of the cosmos. Interestingly, the poem is also bookended with the new generation of gods, post-Ragnarök, finding these same golden playing pieces and taking them up again. Indicative of the narrative function of material, we see not only a mimetic description of these golden playing pieces, but structurally these pieces link the narrative episodes of Genesis to eschatology. Thematically, they embody a sense of order for the gods, a game of checkers in which a defined set of rules dictates play and the play and structure of the universe, driving it to the game's eventual conclusion and the start, presumably, of a new game. The placement of these pieces within the narrative is strategic. They indicate to a reader that the game the gods play in creating and attempting to maintain order has a set beginning and an ending, and that this pattern will continue into a new world. If, however, we make considerations for the nature of how such objects are interacted with in a very sort of mundane sense, other questions arise to guide our understanding of this cyclical pattern. Who made these checkers? Were they merely discovered at the beginning of time, as they are after Ragnarök? We are only told that they are possessed and found. More importantly, who is being played against? Does God play God? And if so, is this indicative of the inevitable kinstrife that shall tear the natural and social worlds asunder? Perhaps what is being critiqued in the narratives of Norse myths is not the Anthropocene at all. Perhaps it is a capital scene in which competition and production are the primary causes of strife between men and gods. The idealistic world of self-sowing fields and collaborative companionship break down when man fights against man and God strives with God. It is entirely possible that although medieval societies predate capitalist systems, that the ultimate cause of hardship, the judgment and fall of the universe's order, is predicated on needless strife between humanity as the direct result of greed. This perhaps is the warning and the lesson for those of us living in an age after the Norse gods have disappeared from veneration. The sun has set on their world, but perhaps in the twilight of this dawn, we can learn how best to grapple with our own ecological Ragnarök. Thank you.